I think just for the people who are listening who may not have been around during that period, what was the industry like? Because it seems like me growing up around that time too, it seemed like there was the general population. Tell me if this is incorrect. It seemed like there was this Jane Fonda, a bunch of people in spandex just jumping around for an hour and just heavy workouts. And you see these VHS tapes everywhere, and they seemed intense. It almost seemed so intense that it almost, I would say, alienated maybe a majority of people because it was like, oh, that's not for me. Whereas, what was the culture around exercise in the United States in the late 80s, early 90s? Was it as accepted? Did you undergo any criticism? Were people like, oh, this is going to work, what you're doing is not backed by science? You talk about kind of the challenges you went through to get there.
Well, I think because you're bombarded with a lot of the media, with the Jane Fondas of the world, basically touting, and even, and God bless him, even Richard Simmons is still doing a lot of aerobic activity. His was like 30 minutes and above. But the idea was, they basically had one component of fitness. And I think it started to shift, though, with Denise Austin starting to get her on her TV program, starting to shift towards doing a little more resistance and using your body as resistance. And then I think it then shifted a little more towards combining both, elements of fitness as well. But I think the idea was it was more of it was a fashion statement too. Everybody had their leg warmers and their tights, and you had all these beautiful people. But I think it alienated 90% of the population who were not the pretty people, who were in Hollywood and fluffing up their big hair because that was the 80s, let's face it. And you had all this fancy music. And I think if you remember right, there was a movie with John Travolta and maybe, Jamie Lee Curtis. And it was called Sweat or something. I can't remember what it was called, but it was the idea of workouts and so forth in that time period. And you had all these people.
There was Flashdance.
What was the name of it?
There was Flashdance. Remember, it was
a part of it. It's right in that era.
Yeah.
I think it was maybe in the 90s. Yeah, it was right there. And it was the idea that.
So, have you watched this Apple TV series, Physical? Have you seen this? I'd be so curious to see your. You should check it out. I'd be so curious to see what you think of this. It's a Jane Fonda biopic in a way. It's not really her. It's like an archetype of this woman trying to start that business and growing and scaling.
That's wild.
Sorry to interrupt you, but
it's called Physical. I might have to look that up because I think it's very apropos in today's market.
Rose Byrne is
But Robbie, I'm telling you, I think when people start looking at that and going, okay, that is not me. There's no way that's going to be me. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel confident in a room full of 30 sweating people and they're all looking beautiful and they got their tights on and so forth, because everything was tight back then. Even when if you look at the campy stuff that we wore, I wore a unitard, for God's sake, like a wrestling.
I saw that. I was like, should I bring that up or not? Because I was like, I need the story behind the blue.
My wife's like, what were you thinking? I'm like, you know what? I said, it was just a part of that mindset back then. I wouldn't wear it now, but the idea is, I think we alienated a large group of deconditioned people, which I think was a huge mistake. And so I think later now you see how people are integrating deconditioned people in here, and they're using models that are more deconditioned. If you look at the models behind some of the instructors now, back in the 80s, I got to tell you, everybody was fit. I mean, we did 8-minute abs. We had a guy behind us who had his shirt off, right? And I'll tell you how they got him. I did not pick him as one of our models, but he was a stripper. he was horrible, though. He was absolutely horrible. They got him as a male stripper. And I'm like, this guy's a lunkhead. He's a bodybuilder type. And it was like, totally, I would not have chosen him as my model. But even then, back then, when we started looking at that, and that was what, 1994, everybody had to be in perfect shape. It was like, man, not now. You can see people are deconditioned, and they're saying, that could be me. And that's what you want to do. You want to relate to that person because that's your audience. And, I think there's 60-some% of the population is overweight. So why would you have somebody behind you that's, in perfect shape? It doesn't make any sense. It's not your target audience. It's not your demographics. So we try to basically now, I think, look at that and go, look, this is it's inclusive, everybody. And I think you go at your own pace. That's where I think we want to go with it. And it's challenging for everybody. You can challenge yourself. That's the thing. You want to make it harder, you just instead of lifting 5 pounds, maybe you lift 10 pounds. There's ways you can do it, but you can't get around the idea that you have to be consistent. And, consistency to me beats intensity any day of the week. And so I just tell people, Robbie, everybody says, well, I don't have willpower.